Hello, fasting family. Welcome to Mitch and Sam's morning study group, where we sit down and we review some of the latest podcasts, documentaries, and other relevant topics to help you along in your fasting journey. So, today we're going to be discussing all of the things that you need in order to become a student of life and to continue learning. And this is something that we do each morning: is sit down and review, or most mornings of the week, review a podcast or something that we've learned. So, Sam, introduce today's topic and today's podcast. What did we just sit down and listen to this today?
Cool. So today we've sat down and listened to ATP's podcast on intermittent fasting with Steve and Jeff.
That's the ATP project.
Yeah, sorry. The ATP project. So they're great for us because they're very science-based. So we tend to learn something new every time we listen to a podcast from these guys.
Yeah, it's like they're the yin to the yang for us.
Yeah. So it was cool to listen to their perspective on intermittent fasting. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. So basically we're just going to go through some notes that we wrote down. We haven't even talked about this yet. We're purely going to be discussing this on this show, and feel free to leave a comments down below with any questions. And if you do find that this show may be beneficial, then you can find that in iTunes and we can probably link that up for you as well. But today we're going to start off with some of the benefits of the show, some of the things that we thought could have been better, and then we'll get into the notes. So what did you find? What did you like about it?
I liked that it gave like complete different perspective and new information to what I typically concentrate on when it comes to intermittent fasting. So as I mentioned, scientific, science-based, and a lot of studies that came through to really emphasize what they were talking about, I really liked. What could have been improved on my end was I think they would open up a discussion or open up a topic or a question, and then it wouldn't get closed off, it wouldn't get answered because, they would take it in a new direction quite quickly. And so there was still some things in my mind that I didn't get answered because, it went off on a different path. So that would be one thing that I would have liked to see more of.
Yeah, for sure. I think they definitely opened up a lot of really great topics. And, things like Neuropeptide Wire, which I had no idea about, which we'll discuss, and really got into some really great information that wasn't just intermittent fasting, because I find that intermittent fasting brings about a whole heap of benefits, and they went off onto those benefits and dug deeper into those benefits as well. But what you're saying, definitely correct, is that they were opening topics up and never closing them at all, and you're just sort of left trying to keep up, and you sort of didn't know where the conversation was going. And so that was a bit exhausting, but overall it was pretty decent, and we definitely learned a lot. So let's get into it. Topic number one, what did you have?
So the first thing that opened up for me that I really liked was them talking about like the 16-8 intermittent fasting protocol. So that's where you're fasting for 16 hours, then you're eating for 8 hours, which we talk on a lot. It is one of our favorites. And why I liked that, because they brought up the whole getting back to your natural state.
Yeah.
Getting back to the natural cycles. And the thing that they emphasized as well was it's not just about with the food and how that's going on in your body when you're putting it in, but it's about that you actually have like a natural rhythm within your body, and that's waking up with the sun, for instance. And so then when we throw this out by perhaps being a shift worker where your body clock's completely different, you're also throwing out the chemicals and things in your body, so it's resulting in perhaps pretty bad health issues.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That's something that I really picked up on that I really liked.
Yeah, and they actually mentioned a study in there that on rats, feeding them the wrong time of the day and the same amount of calories, they still got fat. So i.e. it's just like being a shift worker. So naturally as humans, we're supposed to eat during the daytime. If we eat the same amount of calories at night time, then it's possible we will get fat, just like the study of the rats as well. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and timing, they did touch on that. The timing of when you're eating is really important. And then the other thing that I picked up on that as well was, like, we as humanity, are getting so out of touch with who we naturally are and all of our natural rhythms because of, having fridges and having electricity and having artificial lighting. And so we're not waking up with the sun and going to sleep when the sun goes down, right? Because we've got all of these artificial things nowadays. And so it's stuffing up our natural rhythms. And my experience with fasting in general is that it brings me back to my organic timeline. And so it gets me more in touch with my organic nature and rhythms, which I think is really powerful when it comes to fasting. So that was something I really liked.
Yeah, and that's fasting specifically, taking time away from the computer and all of those things. Yeah, super interesting. So just a little bit more on that. What I also found pretty interesting around that conversation was, so basically what happens is you got your cortisol in your body that puts a little bit of a stressor on your body when you wake up in the morning so that you get up and out of bed. Just like at night, your body releases melatonin, which suppresses your appetite and you fall asleep. A stat that they put out there, which is really fascinating, was between 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is when most people die. It's because they, when they're getting really old and the body can't take as much stress anymore, that little bit of cortisol in the body is enough to kill them. Now, cortisol can be a good thing for most of us who are relatively fit because it allows us to get out into the day and actually do something. But too much cortisol in the body is, as we know, you can't build muscle or lose fat. And then when you get older, then it can potentially kill you as well in that scenario. So that was pretty interesting.
And then they talk about how your daytime is meant to be where you spend your energy. So you're spending it with utilizing nutrients, utilizing building muscle, those types of things. But then the evenings where you save the energy. So you're detoxing, you're repairing, you're fat burning, those types of things.
Yeah. And your highest testosterone secretion is at 7 to 8 a.m. as well. So that's another thing to get your body going. And I imagine it would be a good time to work out for that repair of the body and the cells as well. Cool. Anything more on that topic? That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I really liked that topic. And they just said when your hormones are out because you're not following these cycles, then that's when the highest point of sickness and illness comes through.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And we know that to balance our hormones, something that we've done in the past and we continue to do every so often is the 5 Tibetan rites. And definitely recommend that to clients as well. And if you want to YouTube that, you'll be able to follow along. But they're just 5 exercises that you can do every morning, every night. Really simple.
You can do it with kids around. You can do it at any point. So it's good.
Yeah. Awesome. I've got in here next, alternate day fasting. So they sort of moved on to that particular subject and quoted a lot of studies. So one thing that it did mention about the studies is that they're not a huge amount of them done on humans, and simply for the fact because of human nature, they can't get enough people to stick to the study for a long period of time in order to actually get some tangible results that we can actually speak about. Now, that's why we always say that the best person to actually do a study on is yourself. And if you really want to get to know what results you can actually get, then do it for 30 days and just see how you go. So back to alternate day fasting, studies have shown that, and sorry, just to expand on that, the reason I got off track is alternate day fasting seems to have the most amount of studies that I've found in order to back up that particular intermittent fasting style. But alternate day fasting, they mentioned studies that show improvements in HDL cholesterol, which is good, reduced in triglycerides, which is good. Also a higher LDL cholesterol as well, which is not that great. However, LDL does actually serve some benefits just throughout, it's talking about fasting increases the fats in the body, which is why the LDL goes up. Which
in the liver, right?
Yeah, and which, fat used to be looked at as something that was really bad, but we're no longer in that position, thankfully, anymore. So it's not a great thing, but it's not bad either. They've also got in here that it can reduce visceral fat. So that's the visceral fat is the fat around your organs, and you see a lot of guys around the stomach who are really fat. So that's that fat. leptin, reduced visceral fat, leptin, and reduces cell proliferation, which reduces your sugars down, so cancer cannot survive. I've also got in here reduces IGF-1, which is in the liver, which is basically the building block to growth. So if you have cancer, then IGF-1 is not the most ideal thing to have in your body. However, if you're building muscle, then it is a good thing. However, there's a payoff for both things, right? And then it repairs broken DNA as well, which they were going to expand on, but they never really did, and I was a little bit disappointed about that.
Yeah, I picked up on that one as well, but I did pick up on those things that you've mentioned and how alternate day fasting really accentuated all of those things that it can reduce, and cancer they touched on quite a bit. So if that's something that perhaps that people are looking to, I guess, heal or work on, then that would be one that they'd recommend. And then they went to talk on fat versus muscle as well, but they only really talked about the fat thing, about how the fat that we're feeding ourselves, which is around the stomach for a lot of guys, like you mentioned, and is easier to burn on this type of fast.
Yeah.
But they didn't talk on the muscle thing as far as I was aware.
So I've got that there as well, the visceral fat. And they did go into it a little bit later in where they talked about doing, if you're a bodybuilder, doing 3 days per week to focus on fat loss, which would be having your food in a restricted window and then doing fasted cardio 3 times a week. And then on your rest day, doing fruit salad and vegetables, no protein. So, yeah, they didn't really finish that bit off either. But I've also got in here, there were some weight loss studies that they mentioned about losing visceral fat first. So that's all the unhealthy fat, which is a good thing. And then over time, if you're actually eating the right foods, the subcutaneous fat will reduce over time if eating those right foods. So
much scientific stuff.
Yeah, I know. This is new for us.
Yeah. But they did mention as well is that with the alternate day fasting, when you're reducing your calories, it actually reduces the thyroid function. So it was a bit of a caution thing that they put out there, but then they backed that up with, but if you are exercising, then that's going to help boost the metabolism and boost the thyroid. So I thought that was interesting because loads of people have thyroid issues. Yeah. And now that I think about it, a lot of the people that do is because it's been a lack of exercise, perhaps up until that point.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider. I don't think, definitely don't think it rules out fasting in general. I think it's just you need to be doing the right protocols, and that's like eating mushrooms and pineapple, and also boosting your exercise.
Yeah, and all your iodine food, so all your sea vegetables, the nori rolls, and all of those things as well. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that I came across, as well is that, they talk about how it's when they can't find studies in humans because it's not human nature, it's not easy for people to stick to something that you mentioned earlier. But something that you could perhaps do is instead of just focusing on completely changing your lifestyle and completely, going from something you'd normally eat into a day to restricting completely on a fasting day, is instead actually just replacing bad habits with good ones to help that transition period. So, perhaps if you're used to having your dinner and then you're used to having like a big bowl of ice cream with, Milo or chocolate or whatever on it that's not so healthy, what can you do today to be able to replace that bad habit with a better one? And that could just be going to Whole Foods, so finding like a raw treat or like a pan of chocolate or something, or dark chocolate even, and just replacing those habits and just slowly transitioning in.
Yeah, for sure. I like it. Cool. Anything else on that topic?
That topic I think is good.
Sweet. Moving down from that is something I found really fascinating, Neuropeptide Wire. So they didn't really give us a clear explanation on what that was. So I got that from Wikipedia just before we jumped on. So I'm just going to read this out loud and then we can discuss it. So neuropeptide Y is a 36 amino acid neuropeptide that acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain and in the autonomic nervous system of humans. In the autonomic system, it is produced mainly by neurons of the sympathetic nervous system and serves as a strong vasoconstrictor, which is the narrowing of blood vessels, and also causes growth of fat tissue. And then it goes on to say that it has several functions, including increasing food intake and the storage of energy as fat, reducing anxiety and stress, reducing pain perception, affecting the circadian rhythm, reducing voluntary alcohol intake, lowering blood pressure, and controlling epileptic seizures. Now, there's a few good benefits in there, but the first one that I mentioned, increasing food intake and storage of energy as fat, that's the one that they were discussing specifically. So basically what they're saying is that the leptin reduces neuropeptide Y, but when people start to overeat on carbs and sugars and refined sugars specifically, not your good sugars like fruits, but overeating on bad carbs and refined sugars, then it starts to, your leptins become resistant. And then that's when, they're starting to understand obesity a little bit more, where people just thought that people can't control themselves, whereas it's actually a chemical reaction inside the body, specifically inside the gut in this circumstance, that people are actually just not able to control their hunger cravings because they're so strong. And they mentioned a study where they fed the rats, or they injected this particular this gut bacteria into the rats, into their brain, so that they became so hungry that, and then they electrified their food. So even though the rats would get electrified and some sort of an electric shock when going to eat their food, they still continue to eat it and eat it and eat it because the chemical imbalance was so strong. And it's just like an obese person, if they walk past a burger place, then they can't not go in there because that satiation is so strong, that hunger causing pain is so strong that they just have to do it to try and get some relief.
And it's interesting because then they brought up the band surgery that people are getting to shrink the stomach and shrink the need to put more food in there because they've stretched their stomach. What do they call it? The lining? Is it something?
No, I don't remember.
They've stretched that thing in their stomach that is meant to be at that point where it tells you you're full, tells you you've had enough. Yeah. And so people go and get this band thing because it gives them, I guess because they are so out of control because of this chemical imbalance.
Yeah. And we don't condone that type of stuff either. We don't agree with surgeries at all. So I think there's better ways to do it, and understanding this is a good starting point so that you can begin to take the right actions with the right support to help you through this.
Yeah,
because it's tough.
And they do mention that fasting, especially for the longer periods of time, or the 16-8 more specifically, is better for the gut and also for the DNA repair.
Yeah. Awesome. What else do I have in here? So we've got in here, just continuing on with this neuropeptide Y. In eating disorders such as obesity, there's a study that revealed 4 underlying factors that contributed to obesity in rats, which was an increase in glucocorticosteroid concentrations in plasma. I've got no idea what that means, but we'll move on. Insensitivity or resistance to insulin, which we already pretty much know. Mutation of leptin receptor, which we mentioned just before, and then going on to say that's an increase in neuropeptide Y and neuropeptide Y release. So there are studies in rats that are backing up, this information, and it makes sense. So cool. So I just had in here that they touched on keto, which the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting actually they're brought up in the same conversation quite a lot, and we've actually had like Dr. Jocker's discussed this for us as well. And they talk about keto that it shouldn't be used as a long-term thing. And that's from what I've read, and I've only done little bits of research on it, I tend to agree with that as well, because simply for this reason, that the body needs locally grown fruit and vegetables in order to build the nutrients and the enzymes in the body to be able to perform at a higher level long term, in my belief. And the body actually craves sugar from time to time. And if you're not eating enough fruit and stuff, then you tend to go for the things that are not so good. I believe that a lot of sugar addictions that people have are because they're not eating enough fruit. So I was really happy that they discussed that, because I think, we get so set on sticking to just one thing that we believe that we're going to do it forever. Whereas I think there's time and space for most of what's out there, but ketogenic for the long term, there's a lot of hype around it right now. I think it's a little bit unrealistic and not ideal. To continue on something else, we've covered the bodybuilders section. One that is studied a little bit more, the 7-day Adventists. So they actually have their last meal in the afternoon, so they can actually continue to study these guys for a longer period of time. And they found that they live longer and have an improved lifestyle by doing that. And then they finished up with just some advice for people starting out right now, which would be give yourself at least 12 hours every 24 hours to fast. We always say at least 16 hours. We find that works best. And also that fasting is much easier for most people because it gives you something tangible to stick to. You're simply not eating. You don't have to eat less calories. You don't have to eat a specific type of food. It's just a certain period of time where you don't eat at all. So
and you get used
don't
to
even
it.
have to think about it.
It's funny because they brought up the 80-20 rule as well, where and it's so interesting now from the perspective that I'm in, because I probably used to be in this headspace, but now I look and what they were saying is that it stresses people out in society right now to think of eating organic or eating the right foods, and it's too expensive, it's too hard to do it all the time. So there's this whole 80-20 rule where 80% of the time you eat well, but then 20% you eat whatever you want, which technically means you eat junk. And I don't agree with it. And I think it's knowing what I know now, I think it is easy to eat healthier. I think it is easy to feel good. And I think they're saying the biggest motivation for people to change and for people to actually stick to something is after they've had the heart attack, or after they get the cancer, or after something happens. And then they get motivated to be healthy and exercise and stick to something. Where I think a lot of people now don't give it enough time to actually feel the benefits of feeling good because you've changed the habits now whilst you are healthy. And I get that it gets to a point. I mean, it happened to me where I woke up one day, I was like, something's got to change because I'm feeling off, I'm not feeling great, and it's been going on for way too long now. And then you make the change and you don't know how good you can feel, and then you feel it, and then you're like, this is awesome and I'm going to stick to this. But I think I don't think with what's possible now, with what we have access to, and with all the information and all the availability of food and access to health foods and things that we have, I don't think that it should be this stressful, hard, negative thing that we need to do. I think it's so possible to do it easily and deliciously.
Yeah, for sure. And I took that a different way, though. I thought he was saying that he doesn't eat organic 100% of the time. It's like 80% of the time. And so many people get caught up in the opposite, whereas if they don't have exactly that meal, then they get really stressed out. So it works both ways, that you do have to actually be flexible sometimes as well. However, they did go on to say that if you are sick, you have to be 100% in. And I totally agree with that. When I was sick, I was 100% in. I didn't eat out for 6 months. Every single meal was at home for 6 months, unless I knew where there was an organic juice shop, or unless I knew that there would be food that was whole foods that didn't have any additives, chemicals, anything like that. I even remember sitting in a burger joint one day with someone else and watched them eat a burger because I thought I was going to eat the sweet potato chips, but they were too deep fried, so I didn't eat them. And so you got to be 100% in if you're sick, and if you're not, then you won't get the results as fast as you want them to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think not saying that now I'm not flexible. I think it's just I'm saying it's more accessible to. It doesn't have to be organic all the time, but eating whole foods, it's like something's not organic, you're not going to then just go and have Maccas instead, are you? It's like there's so many options there. It doesn't always have to be organic. There's there's like local markets. There's all sorts of things that I think is definitely more accessible.
Yeah, that's super easy. And then just to finish up, something that they sort of alluded to as calorie counting and a calorie deficit has been recommended for decades and it hasn't worked. So let's try restricting your eating window to a shorter amount of time. What have we got to lose, basically? And I totally agree with that, and that's why we continue to share this message. So that's all I had. Anything else that you want to wrap up with, Sam?
No, I think overall, like, it went in so many different ways. It was super interesting, and I think going back to they brought up Michael Mosley and the 5-2 diets. There's so many different forms of intermittent fasting that's out there, and that's not a diet. It's about giving it a go and seeing what works for you. I think it's so important.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of messages in there that aligned with what we talk about. So a few things that we were not big on, like I mentioned, a few supplements that was probably not something that we would recommend. But overall, pretty decent. I learned a lot, and it opened up a few areas that I want to research more. So yeah, let's wrap it up there, guys. So this is our first time doing this. We'd love to get some feedback on what you think and if this has been valuable to you. Also, feel free to pop some comments, down below, and we'll be sure to answer them as well. And if there's anything that in this episode that you think could be useful for your friends, then give it a share as well, and we'll speak to you next time.
See you guys.